I have already made some videos about Riverpod, but I have used the stable version. In this video, I'm going to use this development version, and obviously you don't have to use this development version during production. And yeah, now let's install it by copying it from the official documentation. Inshallah, I'm going to leave a link uh, if I remember. Okay. And now let's go into Visual Studio Code. I have already created a simple project. I have deleted all the other stuff, and I have inserted a simple stateless widget. So let's head on into the pubspec.yml. Okay. Okay. And save. Now we can go here and type import Flutter Riverpod. Okay, we have imported it. And so right now we want to create a variable that stores our provider. And don't worry if the variable is global, because the provider is immutable as is stated into the documentation. So it says that it is like if you define a function, so you absolutely don't have to worry. So we are going to define it with final my provider and calling the provider package, and here it returns back a strange ref parameter that we are going to see in a moment, inshallah, and here the value that we want to return. So how it works, first of all, this is the most simple type of provider, and you call it only by calling provider, and it gives you a parameter called ref that contains some information about provider, and you can use it to call, for example, other providers with some methods that it has, and inshallah we're going to see it in a moment. And yeah, and here you can return anything you want. In our case, we are returning a string, and it is going to return a string as a value. We can create as many providers we want with the same type. It is not a problem. We can return any type we want, a number, an integer, a string, anything we want. And as I said, this is the most simple provider. It has the value that it is static, so it doesn't have a state and it doesn't change. And yeah, so the question now is how we are able to get the value of this provider here. So basically, in the previous versions, you were able to call context that, and you had, for example, watch or read. In this new version, things are a little bit different, because if you want to call a provider, first of all, you need ref. That it is this thing here, and to get ref, there is we have basically two ways, and we are able to call them by creating a new type of widget that replaces this one here, the stateless widgets, and the stateful widget. So for the stateless widget, instead of using the stateless widget, we must use the consumer widget. So just like this. And what happens when you use a consumer widget? It is absolutely identical and the same as the stateful widget. And the only thing that is different, that here you have another parameter that you of type widget ref, and yeah, you have this second parameter here. So, and now you are able to get your value. And obviously you in this consumer widget, the stateless widget under the hood, you are able to call the ref only here inside the build. And obviously you will need it only here inside. So let's save our value. My some text is equal, and we can use ref.watch, and we can call our provider. So let me add here some text, and let me delete the cons from here. And then now we can save, and let's run our application. So basically now we have this rep, and we are able to call our provider. So the most important thing that you had to understand is that you have two ways to read a provider, and you have ref.watch, and ref.read. So you should always try to use ref.watch, and ref.watch works in this way. It is able to read the provider, and if something changes, it re-renders that thing that changed. So it not only listens for things, it not only read things, but it is able to listen to them and change them when they change. I hope that this is clear. And instead, for ref.read, you are only able to read them. But as the developer that created this package, it says that it is always better if you use watch, even if you want things that doesn't change. Instead, you should do a little trick that inshallah we're going to see, but you should always try to prefer this one. And for example, if I remember well, in callbacks you should use ref.read. For example, if you have on pressed, you should use ref.read. So that's it. You have these two ways, and you don't have to worry for the performance thing, because maybe you may think that by using ref.read you save a little bit of performance, you have a better performance, but it is not the case. So obviously this type of provider, as I said before, it never changes, so we are not going to see this thing with this type of provider. And yeah, so obviously now before starting the application, we want to do one thing. We must first wrap our my app with provider scope. So provider scope child. Okay, I want a constant. So yeah, we should wrap it with provider scope. So now we are able to put this variable here, and we can now run our application. So as you can see, we have now our text. Well, so now we want to take a look at another provider that it is different from this one. It is able to change, so it has a state, and it is called state provider. So now the different thing when you call it, for example, is that obviously this here you have the same things. You always watch to it with watch, and here you should call the state instead of calling it right like this. So, and remember, as I said before, you should use a consumer widget, and you will use it instead of stateless widget. So now we can save, restart our application, let me change this text and our text. So here we have our new text. Let me hide this bar here. We don't really need it. Okay, this one, something like this. Okay, we have our text. So now we can change the value of our text. Let's create a simple button here. So now if we press here, you can see that the text change. And we have used the always ref and we have used read, as I said before, because when you are using a callback, you should use read instead of watch. And for those who don't know, a callback is a function that you pass to, for example, on pressed, and when you press the button, this function get executed. Okay, I hope that it is clear. And so it is a function that gets executed but by onPressed when it needs it. And yeah, and to change the state of your provider, you always reference to the state property and you change your state. And so you should, as I said before, again, you should always prefer to use ref.watch. Only when you must, you can use ref.read. And as I said, inside callbacks is the thing where you have to put them. So now we want to change our consumer widget instead of using this type of widget, we want to create another one. Let me comment out this one, and we want to create a stateful widget that we can call my app as before. And reality, we can call all this part here. Okay. And we can call this one here too. So let me change the text. And so basically now, as I said before, the thing is that we need the ref. And to use the ref, as before, we cannot use a stateful widget, but we must use a consumer stateful widget. And another thing that we must change is here the state, and instead of using state, we should use consumer state. And the difference between this consumer stateful widget and the other consumer widget is that here, instead of getting ref as the second parameter, you will get it as a property. So for example, you can just call ref like this. Obviously you cannot call it here, but if you do init state, you can call it here f.read, as you can see, for example, or obviously it is better f.watch. So as before, we are able to call it here. Also, we can call it here in any phases we want, for example, in this pose and other phases. And yeah, and here we have basically the same application of before. We can now restart and see that basically nothing changes. So now if we press the button, things change as before. And now let me show you the last thing, that counter provider example, and we can create another state provider. Here now we are going to create another provider that will contain a simple counter, and it will return 0, that is the first value, and we can return it here. Okay, and basically here, instead of this one, we want to call here, we want to call our counter, and we want to increment it. And here inside the here we want to change the type, instead of my provider, counter provider, and we can call it my counter, for example, just to change things a little bit. Let me restart again. So now if we press this button here, we can change our value. So if you don't want to the provider to rebuild his state, and you want to save a little bit of performance, let's say, instead of using ref.read, as I said before, you should use Notifier here. Obviously, we are not going to check the state anymore, and here in this variable, obviously this is only a controller, so here instead what we want to read the state. So now let's save. Now if we press the button, as you can see, nothing happens, and let's type print and type our counter. As you can see, now if I type only counter and I update, you will see that this is only a controller, so we are not really watching the state from here. Okay, now as you can see, I have only a state controller, and we want to take a look at the state. So let's save again. Okay, now we are ready. Now, if you press the button, as you can see, nothing happens here on the screen, but the value is updated. So this is a way that where that you can use watch instead of read if you don't want to render everything, and you just have to call the notifier property, and instead of the state, and yeah, and then it is like the other way. So, and this thing, it is not a workaround, but it is how it is described into the documentation. So it is an official thing that it is explained by the who created this package. So yeah, for thing for today is everything, and if you found this video useful, check out my channel. I have other things about Flutter, and inshallah you can subscribe and like the video to help me. Okay, see you the next time. Bye.